Welcome to Faculty View with CWRU. I'm Julia Liston, the student editor-in-chief of the Case Western Journal of International Law, and I'm talking today with Dean Michael Scharf about the war on ISIS and legal implications. Dean Michael Scharf served as the counsel to the Counterterrorism Bureau and the attorney advisor for UN Affairs at the State Department. He has a forthcoming article entitled How Our War on ISIS is Changing International Law, and it'll be published in our journal in the spring. Dean Scharf, do you think the November 13th attacks by ISIS on Paris have signaled that the threat from ISIS has changed?
Yeah, Julia, I think it's a real game changer. And the reason I say that is before the November 13th attacks, ISIS was really just focused on land acquisition and territorial gain in Syria and Iraq. And now they are acting more like traditional terrorist groups, Al-Qaeda and others. They are attacking outside of the borders of that area. They are attacking vulnerable targets. So they have attacked things like stadiums and pubs, and they are likely, I think, to continue to attack things like trains and buses and even water treatment centers and all sorts of places that are very hard for us to guard against terrorism.
Wow, yeah. So how do you think our response to ISIS will change in light of these attacks in the
Well,
West?
so if you remember, right after the 9/11 attacks, we really ramped up security and we gave up a lot of our civil liberties. And the pendulum has largely swung back so that we're back where we were before 9/11. I think this pendulum is going to swing right back to where it was right after 9/11. So you're going to see all sorts of increased security. You're going to see an erosion of civil liberties, but mostly you're going to see major military action against ISIS in Syria. And that will be done by the United States, by France, by other countries, including maybe Russia. And it will be Tomahawk cruise missiles, it will be bombers, and I think we're going to see a lot more boots on the ground as well.
Yeah. Okay. Some experts believe that it violates international law to be attacking Syria as we have been without a Security Council resolution or without the consent of Syria. And do you agree with that?
Yeah, you know, it's really controversial what's going on right now because for the last year, the United States has been attacking ISIS in Syria without either of those two, the consent of Syria or a UN Security Council resolution. International law says that a country can only use force in another country in three situations. One is with consent of that country. And now we do have the consent of Iraq to fight ISIS in Iraq, but the Assad regime has not given the United States or anybody but Russia the consent to use force in its territory.
Yeah.
So the second is a UN Security Council resolution, but Russia has a veto, and Russia has said the price of a resolution will be that the United States has to promise to allow Assad to stay in power. The United States doesn't want to do that.
Yeah.
The third thing is self-defense. The problem with self-defense is that the International Court of Justice says you can only use it against a state that is attacking you, not when a non-state actor within a state is attacking you, unless the state has effective control of the non-state actor. And this is where, you know, the international law is really, I think, controversial around this. This is where the United States and, for example, the United Kingdom have been disagreeing for the last year. The UK says we're not going to join the United States in bombing ISIS because we don't think they have a legal rationale. Now, the US has come up with actually 4 legal rationales, and they're all pretty bad. And let me just walk you through them so that you can see what I mean. So the first one is that it's humanitarian intervention. We have to go in there to save the Azadi people and others from ISIS's heinous treatment. The problem with that is that international law has not yet accepted humanitarian intervention as lawful without Security Council authorization. So the second one was the United States said, well, since Assad's regime only controls about 14% of Syria, the rest is no man's land, and we can go in because it's a failed state. Now, the problem with that one is that there's at least 18 to 20 other failed states. And if we use that precedent in Syria, all sorts of other countries are going to start invading each other, and it's going to destabilize the whole international system. So the third one is probably the most pernicious of all. Secretary of State Kerry goes to the Senate and he says, this is authorized under international law's theory of the right of hot pursuit. Now, the problem with that is that there is a theory of hot pursuit that's recognized in international law on the seas, but not on land. And there are 2 times the United States tried to make this argument in the past, and they've both been disasters. So the first one was in the early 1900s when a Mexican bandito named Pancho Villa came up into the United States and did a whole bunch of cattle wrestling. And then he went back into Mexico, and the United States sent 4,400 troops, led by General Pershing, to hunt him down. They never did find him, by the way, but the Mexican government was so upset with that, they said, that's a full-scale invasion. That's like an act of war, and the United States ended up having to apologize. The other time the United States used this right of hot pursuit on land argument was during the Vietnam War. And there, the North Vietnamese was coming down the Ho Chi Minh Trail and attacking the South Vietnamese. So the United States was bombing the heck out of the Ho Chi Minh Trail using Agent Orange and other bombs. So the North Vietnamese, the Viet Cong, ended up going over to Laos and Cambodia, which are the countries next door, and then attacking through those countries. So the United States had a secret bombing campaign against Cambodia and Laos in order to kill the North Vietnamese soldiers. And when that was disclosed, it was quite an embarrassment, and the international community said, you can't just go around invading other countries just because your enemy seems to be using that as its trail. So this is what Senator Kerry was arguing, or former Senator Kerry, Secretary of State Kerry was arguing, and it is not a legitimate argument. So finally, the United States has settled on the fourth and probably the best of its arguments, and that is that when a country is unable to prevent non-state actors that are in its territory from threatening other countries, then the other countries can attack the non-state actors, but not the government itself or its military, but the non-state actors itself. Only if the country itself is unable or unwilling to prevent that threat. So the question in this case is the Assad regime unable or unwilling to prevent the threat of ISIS? And the answer is the Assad regime hates ISIS. They want to get rid of ISIS. They've asked the United States to partner with them in getting rid of ISIS. So they are willing. Are they unable? Well, their argument is if you partner with us and you bring Russia in as well, we will be able. So it's a tough argument to make, but I would think that now that the UK is buying into that argument, other countries are buying into that argument, that the argument might become readily accepted. And if the whole world basically buys into a new legal argument, international law is formed. And this may be one of those moments where international law quickly forms.
So what do you think it would take for Russia to sign on with everyone else? Or is it going to be this option where we sign on with Syria and everyone partners up with Russia there? I mean, we've seen a Russian airliner go down. Are they ready to give Security Council the go-ahead? What's...
So the attack on the Russian airliner that has been claimed by ISIS may change Russia's attitude. But up to now, Russia has said the price for our cooperation is that you have to agree to let the Assad regime stay in power. The reason Russia wants the Assad regime in power is that the Assad regime has given Russia for many years a warm water port in Syria. Its only warm water port, completely strategically important to Russia. So for that reason, Russia doesn't want Assad to step down. The United States has argued for the last 2 years that Assad has committed crimes against humanity by using chemical weapons, dropping barrel bombs with nails, and doing torture against its civilian population. The United States and others have said Assad must go. Russia says, you want our cooperation, a Security Council resolution, or other modes of cooperation in this area, you have to change that attitude. And I would predict that this is going to be very hard for the United States to maintain, and that the U.S. will probably end up with some creative middle ground where they say, all right, let's focus on ISIS now, we'll let Assad stay in power for now, and we'll figure out what to do with him down the line, but we're no longer insisting that there be regime change.
And I also, we're seeing a huge refugee crisis, a huge humanitarian crisis happen right now. Do you think that opinions will change and things will happen at the UN because of that, or what?
Yeah, there are hundreds of thousands of Syrians that are fleeing. And one of the reasons ISIS attacked in France was to make it harder for the refugees to leave. And it's worked, because in the United States, our House of Representatives just recently passed a bill that has to still be approved, and there might be a veto, but the bill says we don't want any more Syrian refugees, because in France, some of the people that were involved in those attacks may have been refugees. And so the concern is that ISIS will infiltrate
Right.
by guise of being refugees. And I think that's very unlikely.
Yeah.
And what's really horrible are, some of the arguments that we hear being made by candidates that every Muslim should have, a little insignia, or
Yeah,
that
really
every
awful.
refugee, shouldn't be allowed in anymore. It really harkens back to some of the worst times in history where, refugees were being persecuted and countries wouldn't let them in. And it does seem to me that this is a moment where humanitarianism insists that we act above the fray.
Yeah.
And I'm very concerned about that ISIS wins if they get us to not allow the refugees to enter our territories.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is all very serious. And I think we can see that international law is shifting quickly in light of the threat that ISIS is posing. So thanks for answering my questions today. And thank you for your time.
And thank you, Julia, very
Yeah.
much. It's been a pleasure.
Great.